Well, I think we are at the end of, I just got louder. Did y'all notice that? So Burke says you sleep too much, and so he's just trying to make this work so you stay awake. I think we're at the end of the book of Ephesians. For 12 or 13 weeks, we have been taking lessons from this little tiny letter that was written to the Christians in the wicked city of Ephesus. And we're here right at the end, and Paul has some really important things to say, and I think you probably could make 2 or 3 lessons out of this ending part of the book of Ephesians. I'm only going to make one lesson and do that rather briefly, trying to make one point instead of several points. But I want to begin all this by asking you a question. And we're just going to put the question on the screen. The question is, do you believe that the world is a dangerous place? Do you really think the world is a dangerous place? Now, you can turn on the local news out of Oklahoma City on the television stations there. You can do it in the morning or you can do it in the evening. And you're going to read or hear some message about some business that's been broken into and something has happened as a result of that. Or you may hear something about a road rage or a drunken driver and the result of that. Or you may hear something about a home invasion. And typically every day it gets worse. You find out something about a rape or a murder. I think this last week, I'm not totally sure about this, but I think this last week, I was listening just to a little bit, because I don't listen to much of any of that, but I listened to just a little bit, and what caught my attention is I thought they were talking about this county, Ouachita County. And there was some person, I knew nothing about it, but some person that was appealing to the Pardon and Parole Board, wanting to get his sentence moved from death to life imprisonment. And I saw this little picture of our district attorney just for a moment arguing this case. And it was denied, and so I think it said this coming Thursday, scheduled to death. The question is why? And I tried to listen. And it happened several years ago. Most of you know all about it. Several years ago, he molested a little 7-year-old girl and killed her. At least that's what he was found guilty of. Is the world a dangerous place? And if you think it is, then here's the second question I have for you. Do you take some kind of precaution? Do you take some kind of precaution? And so that would mean, do you lock your car? Because we all know that it's so easy for somebody to open the car door and take something out of it, or someone to hide in the back and you get in without knowing it. Or maybe you have a large dog that you keep in the yard, and so that dog kind of gives this protection against some intruder. And I wonder how many of you have a security system or a camera system. And I wonder how many of you have in your home some weapon for self-defense in case someone breaks into that house. I would advise you not to try to break into Rob's house. I mean, he has more than one. Don't we take precautions all the time? If I'm going to a big city, and I know there's this downtown area, and it's known for being kind of dangerous, I'm very, very careful how I do that or where I go. Well, if you can understand both of these questions, then you'll begin to understand how Paul is ending this letter to this group of Christians in Ephesus. Because what he's going to tell us is, as Christians, we have an even worse problem. It's worse for us. Because we have an enemy. We have an enemy that's lurking behind every corner. And the problem is with our enemy, you can't see him, you can't touch him, therefore you cannot imprison him, and you cannot kill him with a bullet. And all of you know the enemy of whom I speak. Satan. Let's just call him this morning the devil. Let's just call him the devil. Listen to what Paul says as he introduces this subject in Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 10 for a couple of verses. Finally, I'm ending this letter, so finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can stand against the devil's schemes. The devil. He wants to bring so much sorrow and suffering into our lives and so much destruction. He exists, completely exists, for that one reason. And so if he could figure out how to make your marriage difficult and even fail, and if he could see all the pain that goes because of that, he would literally be smiling. This devil is so wicked that when he inflicts punishment, he smiles. He rubs his hands as it were in delight. And if he can cause you to have some kind of illness and take advantage of that, the worse the illness, the worse the pain, the more happy he becomes. And he wants to take us all the way to the brink of death with such amazing suffering. He's always trying to destroy. I had lunch this last Monday with a person who drove over from Tulsa. He is an exceedingly successful person. He's been an elder in one of the largest churches of Christ in the United States there in Tulsa for a long, long time, in excess of 30 years actually. And he said to me in the course of the conversation, Satan is attacking our congregation. And he gave me 2 or 3 ways how Satan is attacking that congregation. They're doing so well. And he said, he's attacking. Now, as he's telling me that, I know that his mother-in-law just died in the last few months, and for 4 years, 4 long years, he and his wife were constantly trying to take care of her because of a fall. And no sooner had this lady gone to her place in heaven than he recently found out that his wife had an aggressive form of breast cancer and had radical surgery. He didn't mention his life, that he was being attacked. He just said our congregation is being attacked. Do you think he attacked you? I mean, the announcement's been made this morning that Nell has passed. I'm telling you, for the last 2 weeks, it has been brutal on this family. Greg and Suze and Zonell and others. Constant. And I have been really distracted. And I've been distracted this week in this lesson. And I think that's Satan's doing. Because you know what Satan wants? He wants this lesson to be so boring and so meaningless that you are yawning and you're saying, what's the use of coming here? Because that's the way he does. And I think he's attacking where I work at Oklahoma Christian. You know, I mentioned last week that one of our key employees, a very dear friend of mine, his wife, a week ago last Thursday, fainted, and they took her to the hospital. They found this diagnosis, and it's proven this week to be even worse. Even worse. And I think Satan's attacking. And he wants to be as brutal and as mean as he possibly can. And he wants life to hurt for you and be so miserable for you that you get so discouraged you want to give up or worse. Does that make sense to all of you? Another lesson about the devil. Wow, how many have we heard? But I'm telling you, he is so real and he is so vicious. He is a serial killer. Now that's how you ought to label him. He is a serial killer. And so Paul ends this letter by saying, you need to protect yourselves. That's what he said. Finally, my dear brothers, in essence, protect yourself. Stand strong against these schemes of this wicked one. Now, he says several things about self-protection, spiritual protection. Several things. I'm just going to highlight 2 and maybe 3 if we have time. Just highlight. Because they're not going to give you, in the beginning and when I start talking about a buzz like I'm hearing something new and I'm hearing something. Watch this one. I'm going to start at the end. He says, if you want to stand strong, if you want to protect yourself, it's not a gun that you need. It's prayer that you need. And when I say that, I know what you're going to think. You're going to think, I've tried that, and I've done that, and I prayed specifically, and I prayed intently, and it did not work. Is that what you think? I'm going to tell you something that probably I shouldn't say. And some of the audience may not like me saying this. And you may judge me poorly for saying it. Let me get my time straight. It was Friday morning that I went to the nursing home by myself for about an hour. And I got right up close to her bed. And for 45 minutes of the hour, I prayed one thing. Will you take her right now? Will you take her this day? Will you stop this suffering? At 11:50 Friday night, Sue says, you only got 10 minutes. Only 10 minutes for the prayer to be answered. And it wasn't answered. So you know what? I went back the next morning. And I was there when Charles came. And Greg came. And then a little bit of time, I prayed. But before I went over there, Sue's asked me this question. We were out on the front porch, drinking our infamous breakfast drink. And she said, what do you think in that your prayer was not answered? And I said, pray anyway. Pray anyway. I was taught 2 lessons last Monday on prayer. 2 lessons. You know that man I was telling you about that I had lunch with? He said, I've been an elder for 30 years at this church. It's kind of a twin church to the Memorial Road Church in Oklahoma City. An elder for 30 years. He said, I do not attend elders' meetings. He said, I don't attend them. He said, while the elders are meeting in this one room, I'm in an adjacent room, and I am praying all the time they meet. And I'm praying for their decisions, but I'm praying primarily that Satan will not invade that room. And I thought, wow. And he began to tell me, he said, I've been on a journey for several years to try to learn how to pray. Then that night, the elders at Memorial Road, the sister congregation in Oklahoma City, they invited Brian and Christy, the people I've been talking about, my dear friend Brian and his wife Christy. They invited them to come because the elders wanted to pray with them about her diagnosis and what she's facing. And Brian and Christy said, Ken, will you join us? I said, yes, I'll come. So I go into the room. I don't know how many elders are there, maybe 15. And there are 2 chairs over here in the front, and they have Brian and Christy come and sit in these 2 chairs, and they gather around, and as many as they could put their hands on her, and one man, one elder, got down on his knees in front of both of them. He took out a little silver vial. He said, this is oil. I think I could hear him say it came from Galilee. And he began to talk about the scripture in James. When any one of you is sick, call for the elders, anoint with oil, and pray. He said, I don't know what this means. But he took a couple of drops of oil and rubbed it on her forehead, and then still on his knees, he prayed. And I walked away thinking, you got to pray. Look at the verse. Look at the verse that Paul says. And pray in the Spirit. You're in the Spirit if you belong to Jesus. Pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. This first line is all I really want you to look at. And when it doesn't work out, pray anyway. Keep on praying. That's the way you protect yourself from Satan. Now here's a second one, and it's quick, and it's also equally well known. It's just trust. It's just trust. Look at the verse. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, the shield of trust, with which you can extinguish the flaming arrows of the devil. Now, what caught my attention at first with that verse is the flaming arrows. All I know about an arrow is from an old Western. That's all I know. And finding a few arrowheads in my life, or seeing a few arrowheads. But can you imagine having thrust into your body with massive force and speed an arrow with a piece of rock, a jagged rock attached to it? How do they get that thing out? And in modern day arrows, if you ever looked at one, they're made out of a different kind of material, and they got this really sharp, pronged piece of metal. Can you imagine the pain, the difficulty that Satan wants to inflict on you? And he says he lights them on fire. That's got to make it worse. This guy's wicked. He's after every one of us. And so he says, if you want to protect yourself, use this thing of trust. Use this thing of trust. It's like a shield. What do I say about trust? It's just hanging on to what God says. It's just hanging on and continuing to say, I believe and I will do it. And the best story I know, there are hundreds of stories in the Bible. But how can you ever forget when 3 young Jewish boys have been captured by an enemy king, a wicked king from Babylon? And he has inflicted so much abuse on their families already. And he says, bow down to an image. And they say, we can't. We have our own God. And he goes into an absolute rage. And he has this furnace, and he heats it up 7 times hotter than normal. And he said, I'm going to put you in that furnace. Don't you know? And they look at him, and what they say is, it ought to be stamped into our memories. With all respect, with all the kindness in the world, O King, our God is able to deliver us from that burning, fiery furnace. But even if he doesn't, we cannot bow down to your image of gold. We will follow him. We will trust him anyway. How many times in this life has your faith been shaken? Really? How many times have you prayed and it's not been answered? You were so specific. How many times have you wondered, is God going to do this? And you want him so desperately to do this, and it doesn't happen that way? And our job is to trust him anyway. Just keep on. And something is unleashed from heaven. A force, a power that's greater than Satan's darkness. And it says it'll protect us. Now let me add one more really quickly. This sounds strange. Remember who you are. Because I looked at this phrase. Look at the phrase with me from this passage. Take the helmet of salvation. This is the first line. Take the helmet of salvation. I've heard that for as long as I can remember and wonder, what's that mean? I'm going to apply it this way this morning. Remember who you are. Because in this world of so much distraction, Satan wants you to forget who you are. He wants you to forget who you are in Christ before the day is over today. Because if you forget, he can lead you this way with temptation. He can lead you that way with temptation. He can do anything he wants to with temptation. And what I've noticed for so long in this world is most people focus so much of their energy and so much of their time on what they do for a living, and so much of their energy and so much of their time on what they have. And you come to the brink of this life's end, and what you have done and what you have had amount to what? Absolutely nothing. But along the way, you remember who you are. And you've got this, it's like a helmet you put on. I am of the saved. I belong to Christ. And what that means is, he cannot win. No matter what, he cannot win. In fact, the last slide says it like this. We win, and we always win as long as we hang on. And in prayers, we keep on praying anyway. And in trust, we keep on trusting anyway. And we keep on following anyway. Can you imagine? Satan has existed his entire time to see Jesus come to this earth and get him to the point he goes to the cross. And when they are scourging Jesus, can you see the devious smile come? And when they thrust the crown of thorns on his head, can you see the devious smile and the wringing of hands and the joy in Satan's face? And when they put the nails in, can you see his face of joy? And when they take his dead body down from the cross, can you see how he's jumping with joy? Only to have that stone rolled away 3 days later, and Jesus is alive, and Satan slumps away because he knows, I lose. I lose. And I'm going to tell you something. I don't know how Nell hung on so long. Who can explain it? Every medical professional said it'll be only a few hours now, or it'll be a couple days now, and here it is a week. And it's another week. And everybody is worn out. And she is suffering. And Satan is what? With every piece of suffering, Satan is what? Smiling and happy and enjoying it all. I got to tell you, at 11:45 yesterday, Satan slurped away in the dumps, as we would say it. He had his head crushed again. Because the moment she breathed her last, she was carried by angels. I promise you, she was carried by angels into a place of paradise. And so I'm going to tell you, protect yourself in this world against all the evil in this world. But my friends, spiritual protection, stand strong in the Lord. Don't give up these basic practices. So Satan doesn't get to win. We win because of what Jesus did.